So I'm old enough to remember,
No, you're not.
unfortunately, I am, prenups. Can you explain sort of how important they are now and why they're more important since they were before?
Yeah, I mean, prenups are so important because they are effectively a record of what parties want to happen if things don't work out, and the same as a postnup. So you can get, for example, an inheritance that people may have, and they may think, well, actually, I didn't realise I'd have that inheritance. And if it's in the marriage, then that's where the postnup comes in, because parties agree, well, actually, that's an inheritance from my side of the family, and I'm going to keep it. But the default position is if you're married, it's 50-50 and you're sharing all of the assets. So prenups are so important if people are having second marriages, they've got assets that they've accumulated before the marriage, whether it's a first, second, third, fifth, 20th marriage. If you've got something that you're bringing into the marriage that you think, actually, I would like to keep preserved as part of my assets, then you need to have a prenuptial agreement to do that. And the law is that if parties enter into it freely and willingly, then they will be bound by it. The only time the court might go behind it is if it's going to leave one person with an insufficient sum of assets or finances to meet their needs.
Okay.
So the court may then dip in to say, we'll give them just enough to keep the lights on, to put a roof over their head, food on the table. But they won't necessarily go as far as saying it's 50-50.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily having just the asset itself, but if you've got, like you said, a startup company, if actually you've got a company that's in its infancy, you hope that that company will turn into a multi-million-pound investment. But actually, you might say, well, what I want is this company and anything it becomes to become a pre-matrimonial asset. And therefore, if it goes very well during the marriage, I keep it on my side.
So next question. So I have to mention an article that you wrote. It was very well published. It was about pup nups. Can you explain a bit more about pup nups?
Yeah, so effectively what it is, you know, with many of us, we have pets, and especially over lockdown, you know, the number of people with pets really grew. And pets are often the forgotten part of separation, or even planning for a life or moving in together.
Yeah.
You know, they are part of the family at the end of the day. And so what we do is with the cohabitation agreements or the prenups or pup nups is we will look at exploring people and say, okay, well, you have a pet. What happens to that pet if one of you passes or if you separate? And putting in place provisions for them. So it's something that's really picking up traction in America. But in the UK, pets are seen as chattels. So a pet is viewed the same as a lamp, this mug. So effectively, if you separate, the court will say, well, we haven't got any law that governs how we deal with the pet and who owns the pet. They'll look at who purchased it, who registered it, who's the registered owner, if it's microchipped, who pays the vet's bills. But what we do say is actually, if you were to separate, what would happen to the pet? And it's amazing the number of clients that I sit with that sort of haven't even given it a second thought. And we'll say to them, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, what happens? And they go, oh my gosh, I must have the dog. And you go, right, okay, well, we need to build that into an agreement then.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you haven't got anything in writing, then you have to go through civil court, which takes a long time, costs a lot of money, a lot of emotion, and you've got a judge deciding what happens with the dog. Put it in writing, and then you've kind of removed any element of doubt.
I'm finding more and more that clients are asking about the animal if they pass away, what's going to happen to the animal. And I often say, if you're going to leave it to somebody, in particular, maybe leave financial provision for them. I had a client who inherited a cat, and at the time the cat was quite healthy, and a couple of months later the cat was very, very poorly, wasn't insured, and it cost them a lot of money. And they weren't very wealthy, but they'd taken on the cat because that's what the will said, and that it was a friend of theirs, so you know, that had passed away. But actually it's quite important to try and leave some sort of financial provision as well, and put in place who you want to have the animal should you pass away. And I'm finding that the clients are more and more asking that more and more, especially as you say, since the pandemic, there's more dogs. People seem to love their animals just as much as their children, which is fine.
Or more than children sometimes.
So not just talking about in wills, we talk about obviously guardianship, what happens if something happens, but we need to talk about the pet as well.
Or really you get people that buy a really big, really wild dog, they then leave it to the family member they don't like in their will.
That's a good idea.